second Bible class in what was designed to be for young people. I think I said last time there were 2 Bible classes designed for young people, then just my regular 2 that I normally have with Bible class. And when I met with the young people, I don't know, a few months ago, I did give them some suggestions. I said to them, maybe you'd like to look at social problems, things like climate change and LGBTQI and all that sort of stuff. So that was one topic I suggested. The other topic I suggested was maybe some of the stories we read in Genesis just seem like fairy stories. Things like they're all up on the top of this big ziggurat that they made, and suddenly one of them started talking Japanese, and the other one started talking Lithuanian, and somebody else started talking Swahili. And was that really the way it went? And it just sounds weird. And the other thing, did people really live till 800 or 900 years old? What changed? Why were they like that? And was that true, or was that just a folklore? So I did say to the young people, are there any things like that that worry you? I mean, people will always argue in the book of Joshua. It says that the earth was still and the sun was the thing that was moving. And we know now that's not true, although I have a lot to say about that when we get to it. And so I suggested that to them. And as I said last time, nobody got back to me with anything. So I just sort of guessed that we might follow those up. And what we're going to do tonight is have a look at some of the stories in Genesis which do cause consternation, I guess, for young people, because young people, I guess, now are more in tune with the sciences, and they are hearing higher level criticisms from people about being a Christian, and probably they are more affected by this than we are. But I still find it fascinating, and so that's what we'll do. And I will just get my little PowerPointy thing up if I can find it. Just hang on a minute. It's here somewhere. Oh, I forgot to share, sorry. I'm old. And I need to... Oh, that's a mess. I might have to log in again, guys. I'm sorry about this. I've only got a picture of Rosemary on my screen. Wait till I find out. Not that there's anything bad about that row, but... everybody's back. Okay, I might be able to do it. Share screen. Share now. Okay, is that better? You can talk. Hold space bar down.
Yes, getting there.
Oh, God.
Okay. Thank goodness. Thank you. Okay, as I said, this was basically designed for the young people. And what I wanted to do was to help them understand that there are lots of clues in Genesis about things we might worry about and seem like fairy stories. And there are clues that there is much more to it than that. I'm just going to get my little laser pointer working. Okay, that's what I picture the Earth looked like 4.4 billion years ago. And what we're going to do now is have a look at, is it possible to actually prove that the first 2 verses of Genesis are actually true? This is what the first 2 verses say. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. First 2 verses, those verses apply to 4.4 billion years ago when the earth was first created. And you might think there's no possible way we could substantiate that. There's no way, surely, that we can prove scientifically that that is true. And to my great surprise, about 7 or 8 years ago, I found that, in fact, you could absolutely prove that all of those statements are true. I think that's staggering that you can find evidence for 4.4 billion years ago and that it matches Genesis perfectly. This is from a study. I'm going to try to move some of my things. Okay, Robin, can you press your spacebar down and read that? Because I've got a banner saying this meeting is being recorded and I don't know how to move it.
Sure. Earth was barren, flat, and almost entirely underwater 4.4 billion years ago. ANU study, 9th of May 2017.
2017, scientists at the ANU established that the world was barren, flat, lifeless, and covered in water. How do they do that 4.4 billion years ago? Well, this is how. I've had trouble with advancing. Yeah, okay. Robin, would you like to read the first line? Sorry.
Sure. The history of the Earth is like a book with its first chapter ripped out, with no surviving rocks from the very early period.
Okay, I'll take over from there. I can do it now. Okay. But we use these trace elements of zircon to build a profile of what the world was like at that time. ANU scientists say the early Earth was likely to be barren, flat, and almost entirely underwater, with a few small islands, following their analysis of tiny mineral grains as old as 4.4 billion years. The lead researcher was Dr. Anthony Burnham. He said the team studied zircon mineral grains that were preserved in the sandstone rocks in the Jack Hills of Western Australia, which were the oldest fragments of the Earth ever found. And I just think it's really impressive that you can just have a look at how the Bible and modern geology matches. The Bible says the world was without form. The Bible says that geology says it was barren and flat. The Bible says it was void. Geology said it was empty. The Bible said it was covered in the deep, and geology said that it was almost entirely covered in water. I find that spectacular. I've shared this with a few friends. I must say, nobody seemed to be as excited about it as I was. But I find that terribly interesting that you can prove 4.4 billion years ago that the first two verses of Genesis were exactly accurate. The world was barren, flat, no mountains, without form, empty, and entirely covered in water. Now, he's one of my favorite guys, and everybody who hangs out with William will know him. There is something here that we've got to say about the first two verses, and they stand as quite different from the verses that follow. There's a YouTube by John Lennox, only about 10 minutes long, and for people who don't know John Lennox, he's professor of mathematics at Oxford University. And I think he's a bit of a favourite. I know Steve and Robin watch him, and Ro watches him, and I do, and I think maybe a few others. And I would strongly suggest that you do. If you've got time, just get onto YouTube, just put in John Lennox. He is a really, really impressive Christian. He has a centre at Oxford called the Centre for Apologetics. And just a quick word on that. Apologetics does not mean apologising for anything. It simply means those who stand up for the Christian faith, those who defend the Christian faith. I don't know why. I'm sure there's some Latin root word or whatever, and that's what it means. But basically, what he says is that those first two verses have a quite different tense. The past tense of created is different to God said in the following verses. So these first two verses do not follow the 6 days of creation. They were well before. And it's certainly my belief the first two verses were 4.4 billion years ago. And then from verse 3 onwards comes the story of creation. John Lennox is a mathematician, and so he doesn't pretend to know all that much about Hebrew, but he has consulted with the professors of Hebrew and at both Oxford and Cambridge University, and they both said this is a fact. The first two verses have a different past tense than verse 3 and all the following verses. And so it actually relates to what happened 4.5 billion years ago. just to show off a bit for John, he looks like Santa Claus to me. If he had some whiskers, he could make a good Father Christmas. He's about 82 or 3, but still really, really easy to follow, and really a great person to listen to. I've listed his qualifications there. He's got a PhD and a DPhil and a DSc. PhDs and DPhils are the same. This is the award given by by Cambridge University, and this is by Oxford University. They're both Doctor of Philosophy, and you can't get a Doctor of Philosophy degree without discovering 4 or 5 new things that have never been known before. You have to present something that's never been known in the history of mankind, and that's the only way you can get that degree. This one is the standout. In all my travels through academia, I've never met anyone with a DSc. That's a Doctor of Science degree. With that, you have to have discovered something like 100 new things that's never been known in the history of the world. And that brands John Lennox as a really, really highly intelligent, but such a convicted Christian. And I would absolutely recommend anybody have a listen. So the first 2 verses of Genesis is this, that basically they occurred well before the creation story. And we would say 4.4 billion years ago. And that was attested to by geology, which I think is pretty amazing. The world was covered in water. Where did the water come from? Well, little bit of cosmology. When the Big Bang started and the universe started about 13.8 billion years ago or something, all there was energy. There was just this explosion. And I might say the word Big Bang was coined by skeptics who did not believe it. They just want to poke fun at it. They said, oh, what are you saying? The universe started with a Big Bang. And that's just caught on ever since, even become the title of a TV series, I think. But that basic concept that the Big Bang created is now accepted, basically. There's some variations, but now accepted by scientists. And just out of interest, do you know why it was rejected in the 1950s? Very famous astronomer, Sir Fred Hoyle, who was the Astronomer Royal, was absolutely furious at the concept, hated it, and he was the one that came up with an abusive name, the Big Bang. Why did he hate it? Because it implied a creation, because it implied a start to the universe. And he was furious because he said, if there's a creation, there's got to be a creator. And he spent the rest of his days hatefully trying to destroy this theory, but now it's taken over. It's only the most reasonable one we've got left. Gradually, as time went by, all that radiation began to cool. It stretches out as it moves across the universe. It began to condense into particles. And you start to get little tiny particles called quarks and other particles called leptons and other particles called bosons. And they congregate eventually to form protons and neutrons, and they congregated to form atoms. But eventually, the whole universe consisted of nothing but hydrogen and helium. They were the only 2 elements formed. We know now there are 92 naturally occurring elements. There are lots more that can be man-made, but naturally occurring elements, there's only 92. The lightest of all is hydrogen, and the heaviest is uranium. And every school kid will know they're all sketched out on a thing called the periodic table. But only 2 of them ever existed in the early universe. They clumped together by gravity, and as the gravity squashed them together, they began to be squeezed, and the nuclei of different elements, well, starting hydrogen and helium, got squished together and they formed lithium, and the lithium and hydrogen got squished together and they formed beryllium, and they got squished and they end up forming whatever comes after that. So all the elements that we know of are formed in the heart of stars. Those stars went through a lifetime of about 5 billion years and eventually blew up, and that scattered all the heavy elements throughout the universe. And so from about 5 billion years after the origin of the universe, we started to have atoms like carbon atoms and nitrogen atoms and oxygen atoms all formed from the insides of stars. And I'm sure you heard people say that we are made of stardust. And that's in actually fact true. Most of your body is made up of hydrogen, but an awful lot of it is made up of other elements, all formed in the heart of stars. Okay, We've got an Earth covered in water. Where did that water come from? The natural conclusion is that it came from comets. Scientists argue that the Earth was hanging around for about 4 or 5 billion years, and in that time didn't have any atmosphere, and so there were many, many comets collided, and comets are all basically made up of ice crystals and dirt and rock. So we captured the ice crystals from the comets that collided with Earth, and they eventually melted because of the temperatures, and so we get the oceans and all the water on the surface. And I'm going to prove now that that's not true. That's not where the water came from. This is just a picture of a hydrogen atom. Don't worry about that word protium. That's just silly. This is a hydrogen atom. It's got one proton and it's surrounded by one electron. The proton is what makes it hydrogen. If you have one proton, the element is hydrogen. There's a slightly heavier form of hydrogen, which has had one proton and one neutron. It's still got one proton, so it's still hydrogen. But this is the one that they talk about when they say heavy water. Heavy water is H2O made up of deuterium rather than ordinary hydrogen. And then there's this one called tritium, which is made up of 2 neutrons and 1 proton. And these are all different forms of hydrogen, but this is the most common one. For us, only a tiny fraction of seawater is made up of deuterium, this one. And so we're all guessing that they came from comets. And a few years ago, about, I don't know, nearly 10 years ago, they sent a rocket up and it landed on a comet. That's spectacular, that you can send a rocket billions and billions of kilometers into space and locate a comet the size of a football field and land on it. I'm just mind-boggled by the ability of human beings. And when they got there, they were able to analyze the water, and they found that it was not the same as Earth's water. It was, in fact, 3 times more deuterium in it and tritium than water on Earth. So comets are not the source of the water. And all I'm going to say is I reckon we all know who was. Okay, another one of my favorite subjects, and I've talked about this before, so I won't spend too much time on it. We're going to move on now to creation of human beings. And I'm going to start talking about ribs. I do remember many years ago, I think it might have been Paddy's 18th or something birthday, 20th birthday maybe, and we said to him, where do you want to go? And there's a place down on the bottom of Bay Street, where Bay Street meets the Grand Parade. Do you know where that big hotel is at San Susi? Well, there's a restaurant on the water there, and they used to specialise in ribs and all sorts of other stuff. And when you ordered these ribs, you had to be given a bib. And so they tied a bib on you because it was such a mess, you're going to just dribble all this gravy and stuff down your front. And I thought that's a bit silly, but I thought maybe I better get used to it because in years to come, I might, in fact, always have one. So there's the ribs. Now we're going to have a quick look at what the Bible says about ribs. And I've said this before, I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but just as a bit of a reminder. Genesis 2, verse 21 says, and the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. Okay, that Hebrew word, the word is actually, I don't know how to pronounce that, Selah. I won't try to pronounce the T. The word in Hebrew for rib is Selah, and it is never, ever translated rib except in Genesis 2. It is far more frequently translated side and chamber. In fact, from Strong's, here's all the references to that word which Genesis has translated rib. It's translated side 19 times, chamber 11, boards 2, corners 2, ribs 2, and the ribs, of course, is this one in Genesis, and then all these other words as well. The only 2 times it is translated rib is in Genesis, and it's crazy. That's not what it means. It obviously means side, or you can say chamber or side room. That's what it means. And it's very easy to see that there's no such thing as taking a rib from a man to form a woman. Here are a few examples of just where this same word is used. Exodus 25, and you shall cast 4 rings of gold for it and put them in its 4 feet, 2 rings on one side, and that's that word selah, and 2 rings on the other side. And clearly it would not be possible to put in the word rib there. And then in Exodus again, in the second side, same word as rib of the tabernacle, the north side, 20 frames. And it's clearly talking about the second side of the tabernacle. It is not a rib. Pretty clear the word rib does not mean, or that word we've been taking doesn't mean rib. How about any other places where you'll find the word rib used in the Old Testament? And you'll find in all of these places, it refers to the 5th rib. And I'm just going to read one of them. That is, if you stab someone, evidently if you stab them under the 5th rib, that's the quickest way to your heart. So that's the best way to kill someone. 2 Samuel 3, when Abner was returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him quietly and smote him under the 5th rib, that he died, and the blood of Ashel his brother, etc. Now, if you look carefully, I've taken this from the King James Version. You'll notice that the word rib is in italics. And we all know what that means. It means it is not in the original text. That's been inserted. What the text should read is that he was smote under the 5th. Simple as that. Because Hebrew has no word for rib. There is no word for it. And so that leaves us with the concept that Adam and Eve were not formed, well, Adam did not give a rib to form Eve. Then last of all, you might say, well, how about Daniel 7? Wasn't Daniel 7 a reference to ribs? Because Daniel saw an image of a bear, and the bear had 3 ribs in its mouth. And the answer to that, and they are ribs, that's a genuine word for rib. But the answer to that is that it is not in Hebrew. Daniel chapter 7 is one of the Aramaic chapters in Daniel. Daniel contains multiple chapters of Hebrew and Aramaic, and it's the Aramaic chapter. So that's the Aramaic word that is not in the Hebrew dictionary. There is no such word for rib. So I went through Bible Hub, and if any of you have not used this, I would sort of suggest you use it. If you want to investigate what a verse means, put the verse into your search bar and then put Bible Hub, and then just put in that one verse. And it will give you 28 versions, or sometimes more, sometimes less, but about 30 versions of everything you can think of, every version of the Bible from the Latin Vulgate through, every version. And you can compare things like Septuagint, and you compare things like the Tanakh, and all of these things give you an overall view. Only one of those 28 gets it right, and that's the New English translation. And again, I would suggest that you have a look at that translation. It's the most erudite of all translations that we have. It's the only translation recently which has been worked from absolute original documents and not used other translations as a basis. And it says, the Lord God made a woman from the part that he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. It was a part of the man. I personally believe that the original Adam was androgynous, and I suggest he was probably halved to make the 2 human beings. But that's only as I see it. Okay, so I remember when Sammy and I were doing the Sunday school notes, Sam very kindly gave in to my desire to remove the story of taking a rib. So the Sunday schoolers got the story that it was a part of Adam that was taken. Okay. Is there a heading? Rosemary, I'm going to make you wake up. Can you read the very top heading? Or is there one?
Babel.
Okay, that's all. Thank you. Because I can't see it. I've still got this meeting's being recorded. I could probably move it, but I'll probably lose everything. The story of Babel. This is one of the ones where I think people often look at it and say, this just sounds, well, it just sounds like a fairy story. You know, are we saying truly that there were people up there on the top 6,000 years ago, some of whom started talking Aboriginal, and some of whom started talking Swahili, and some talking Hebrew? is that how the languages started? And if you look closely, it's nothing like that at all. There's a few things we just need to get organized first. First of all, Genesis 11 says these are generations of Shem, which produced Abraham. We're getting the story, the others were covered in Genesis 10, but Genesis 11 covers the story of those who were going on to become that group that lived down there between the Tigris and Euphrates, and then they moved over to the land what we call Canaan. The whole earth had a common language and a common vocabulary. Now, we look at that and we say, well, the whole earth, that means everywhere, but it doesn't in Hebrew. The Hebrew word for earth means eret, or is eretz, and it basically can mean a large amount of land or a local piece of land. That word is usually translated land, and it normally does represent a localized piece of land. For instance, Genesis 26, there was a famine in the land, and that's exactly the same word that was used up here for the whole earth. It clearly was not across the whole earth. This famine was not felt in South America. The Lord appeared to Isaac, and he said, do not go down to Egypt, settle in the land that I point out to you. Obviously, the land, Eretz again, is a localized land. Stay in this land, and all these lands I'll give to you and your descendant. This was localized. It is not the whole earth. So what we're talking about here is the whole land that belonged to the Shemites. And just as a matter of interest, when we talk about anti-Semitism, that actually is derived from Shem. They're called Shemites or Semites. And strictly, anti-Semitism means Arabs and Jews, but we only take it to mean Jews now. So it's obviously not the whole earth. Okay, so the lands were local. So the whole earth in Genesis 11 represented the whole of what was the then known world to the descendants of Shem, all of Mesopotamia. Chapter only applied to the descendants of Shem who lived in Mesopotamia. The other sons of Noah had dispersed a chapter earlier. They'd gone. And look at Genesis 10. It says, for these coastlands of the nations, these were all the other ones. These were not the descendants of Shem. For these coastlands of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to its language. Languages had already been created well before Babel, according to their families and their nations. This covers a vast time period. Their language was divergent and quite separate before Babel. So before the story of Babel happened, there was already other languages and people dispersed across the world. And now we come to the story of Babel. This is another thing, and I find this really, really exciting. And I find it so staggering that you have evidential proof, archaeology proof, that all of these stories are true. Rosemary, I'm going to make you read again the first line, please.
Sorry, Genesis 11, verse 3. Then they said to one another, come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick instead of stone and tar instead of mortar.
Okay, that seems an insignificant statement. It seems like it doesn't mean a thing, but archaeology has proved that this is true and different from all other civilizations. In contrast to other civilizations, they use bone and unbaked mud bricks. All of those other civilizations are the ones listed in Noah, the sons of Noah in Genesis 10. Stone and unbaked mud bricks were the exact building materials of most Egyptian constructs. Quoting Wikipedia, most buildings were built in Egypt of locally available mud brick and limestone, not baked bricks and not tar. And then we come to this. This is a quote from Wiki, and I find this staggering. The Sumerians, and they're the people we're talking about, the Sumerians are the people who lived in the Mesopotamian Valley, were the first people recorded to use tar as a joining material. Tar. In the ancient Near East, Sumerians used natural bitumen deposits for mortar and between the bricks and stones to cement the parts of carvings such as eyes and inner place and for chalking boats and for waterproofing. The Greek historian Herodotus said that hot bitumen was used as mortar in the walls of Babylon. So all of these people who are coming from Shem used tar instead of mortar, exactly as the words of Genesis 11 said, and they also had baked bricks, which no other society had. So these two items, as trivial as they seem, brand this story as true before you even get to the story of the divergence of languages. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves." Well, translation of heavens fits the context because the Babylonians had these ziggurats, had temples on top, and they just want to get to the heavens, or maybe that's the place they could feel closer to the gods. I remember Peter Stringer gave a sermon at Hurstville not that long ago where he said they also probably had astronomical observation centers there as well. So any heavenly observations were probably located at the top of these places as well. And it's surprising that in those days people had Bermuda shorts and hats and all sorts of stuff. I think that's a substituted image. Anyway, is there any more to be said about that? Yeah, heaps. We're going to look at the languages. There were two main regions back in this time. Akkad spoke a Semitic language as expected. I might just move my little tiles up here a bit more. This is a picture here of what the area looked like and roughly in Abraham's time or a bit earlier. The bottom half, this is the Tigris-Euphrates Valley that comes down here. The bottom half is called Sumer and the top half is called Akkad. And all these, we're pretty familiar with lots of these cities. There's Babylon there, and there's Urech, and there's Ur. And all of these places are Bible language we're familiar with. First of all, Akkad spoke a Semitic language as expected. So all these people in the top half here spoke exactly the language you'd think they would. Akkadian was the most important language spoken and written in the Near East in the 3rd and up to the 1st millennium BCE. Akkadian belonged to a Semitic language group and is related to Hebrew and Aramaic, or Arabic, I should say. So that's exactly what you expect. This was the language which spread out and went up to the Assyrians, went over to Canaan, exactly what you would expect. Then, this is where it gets exciting to me. I don't know if everybody else gets excited about it, but I'm going to pull my tiles down again. The Sumerian language was spoken in the southern part of the land in the 2nd millennium BCE and was the first language to be written in cuneiform script, which is the script that became popular throughout the whole area. This is the bit, and I get this from Wikipedia. It is an isolate language, meaning that we know of no other language that's related to it ancestrally. It comes from nowhere. The language of Sumer is totally unrelated to any language in existence. And they're right next to the Akkadians. Why didn't they have the same language as the Akkadians? The language was spoken in the region where Semitic languages were also spoken, particularly Akkadian, and it eventually fell out of use in favour of those languages at the turn of the 2nd century. And that's from Wikipedia. But what this is telling you is there was the language existing, the Akkadian language was already there, and suddenly a new language just sprung up from nowhere, with no origin, with no connection. I reckon that's spectacular. They were right next to each other. And there was only Akkadian to start with, but suddenly this new language came from nowhere. How's that possible? That a completely new language would observe with no relationship to surrounding languages? The Babel story. That's the only way you can explain it. Now, that's only a divergence of two languages. But to me, I find that staggeringly convincing. Wikipedia is on my side. Wiki is telling me that there's this new, what they call isolate language, just suddenly appeared from nowhere. So I think we get the story a bit wrong. I think chapter 10 tells us there were many languages already dispersed all over the world. But the Semites, who came from Shem, they were the ones who went down exactly where the ziggurats are to try to build a tower to heaven. They were the one where God created a completely new and divisive language. And it was divisive. Akkadians and Sumerians began fighting each other. And so you ended up with the two of them being totally separate. Okay, this is one I've done before, but this is one that I really like to talk about. And if there were any young people, you can press the space bar and yell out if anybody's young. I mean under 80. Okay, right. I find this really powerful. This is proof to me that people really did live to 800 or 900 years old. I've done this before. I've done a Bible class on this. Probably was about 10 years ago. So you're very naughty if you can't remember it. But the fact is that there is enough evidence for us to know that those timescales are actually true. This is a graph of what's called exponential decay. And it's a graph, I'm sure you've seen this before. It's a very common graph. It's a way anything which decays over time will look. The actual best example of this is radioactive decay. If you have, say, 1 kilogram of uranium, and let's say it's got a half-life of a day. It hasn't, but that doesn't matter. If you have 1 kilogram of uranium, in 1 day's time, there'd be half a kilogram. In 1 day after that, there'd be 1/4 of a kilogram. In 1 day after that, there'd be 1/8 of a kilogram, etc. And when you draw the graph, you get this perfectly smooth graph that goes off very steeply at the start, but then goes very slowly at the end. Now, the reason I don't like using radioactive decay is because it's just too perfect. When you look at it, the graph is perfect. Let's look at something which is still a decay curve, but something which is less perfect. Something like if you gave a group of people a drug, how would it die off in your system? You know that if you take a drug, well, you've only got to take Panadol and you know it wears off in a few hours. Your body just works away at getting rid of that drug. It recognizes it as a toxin, and your body will go and start getting rid of it. Your liver does most of it, but your kidneys join in, they get rid of it. If you got, say, 100 people and measured how the drug you put into them slowly tails off, you'd find you'd get this sort of graph. It's not exactly, it's all sort of wiggly around the place. The reason for that is because different people have got different biologies. Some people's liver are better than others. Some people's gut is slower at absorption. So it won't be exact, but just about every decay curve you can think of goes through this shape. Things like air pressure. If you measure air pressure going on, as it goes up, it gets less and less and less, exactly follows this shape. The maths of this, you can't read that hopefully, but the maths of this was discovered around about 350 years ago by a Swiss mathematician, Leonhard Euler, and basically it's been governing every study of decay of any parameter ever since. Here's a little picture that I drew. I actually kicked myself for doing this because I actually calculated the age of all of the people in the Genesis story, starting from Adam, and I plotted their ages and how long after creation they existed. So for the first 1,500 years, that's before the flood, the red line is the flood, these were the ages. These are the ones we all talk about being 800 years old or 900 years old. I don't know what happened to this guy. I think he probably got hit by a chariot. But this part, almost flat. Suddenly comes the flood. And I hope you can all see. Can you see there's an exponential curve there? It stands out straight away. What that's telling you is it really happened. I've graphed it. I did it on a spreadsheet and graphed this about 10 years ago. I did a few examples, but it comes out to be, and you can extract the formula from it, but it comes out to be an exponential curve. Now that is telling you something. It's telling you it's a natural phenomenon. And I also tried to do it on AI. I thought I'd give AI a whack at it. So I put the data in and AI, it gave me a lot of stuff back. I haven't got it all here, but there's the exponential fit it gave me. And this AI recognized it as an exponential drop-off straight away. Right, a couple of things about it. What does it mean? It means it really happened. It's telling us it's a real phenomenon. If someone was making this up, if someone 3,000 or 4,000 years was making this up, they would have put the dots in a straight line. They would have said bit lower, bit shorter, bit shorter, bit shorter, bit shorter down to here. This was only known 300 years ago. 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, no one knew this graph. And to me, that tells me it's a real thing. It really happened. I put this up on YouTube, and one person said, oh, that's nothing. If you look at the ancient peoples, all of them had the same graph. Not true. Absolutely not true. I actually plotted the ages of the Sumerian kings and the Akkadian kings, and they do not come out to be like this. They just come out like a shotgun scatterblast. There's just dots everywhere, no pattern. Only the Bible has this pattern. And what it's telling you is the story is true. Okay, small story on the sons of God. And I only include this because if the young people were here, they will hear stories where people think that the sons of God in this Genesis story are in fact the angels. It says in Genesis chapter 6, the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. There were Nephilim on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. And also in the book of Job, get another reference to it. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Now I think that there is ample evidence to say that the sons of God were people who were in a relationship with God. God formed a relationship with Adam and his family. And it was the descendants of Adam's family who I think Genesis refers to as the sons of God. And it were the other human beings that were the ones who were called the sons of men or the daughters of men. And this is where the two blended together. And if you blend the sons of God and the daughters of men, you are sure going to lose the closeness to God. And that's exactly what happened. There's only one verse, I think, and that's in Job 38, which suggests that sons of God can be angels. And that's when it says the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy at creation. And I can quite accept the angels being called the sons of God because they were, in fact, in that perfect relationship with God. But let's just have a look at how sons of God is used elsewhere. Trying to move that. I can't read the top line, but that doesn't matter. I'm sure it's not important. John 1, but as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons or children of God, even to them that believe in his name. And by the way, sons obviously means children, men and women. It's not referring to one sex situation. Okay, that to me is almost defining. That tells me what a son of God is. He became empowered to become sons of God because they believe in his name. Next, for as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. And this can translate back to Genesis. It's those who are in a relationship with God who are sons of God. For the earnest expectation of creature waits for the manifestation of the sons of God. Philippians 2, that ye may be blameless, harmless, as sons of God, without rebuke. And I'm going to try to move something here. Oh, I can't. Okay. You can read the last one. Okay. All the New Testament references tell us that the sons of God are those in a relationship with God. And as I said, had the young people been here, I think it's a defining statement for what sons of God are. And the sons of God were those people who still had a relationship with God after Adam, and the sons of Adam went on. Cain is now gone and separated himself, but we're left with Seth. And so it goes. Okay, I'm just having a bit of trouble advancing. Okay. So, who then were the daughters of men? I got my own theory here. I think there are other human beings outside the Garden of Eden, but I'm not going to go into that much now. They were other human beings. You might like to think they were descendants of Cain. I think they were a separate creation, but that's just the way it is. And one bit of evidence for that is in verse 26. I think we're still in Genesis chapter 6. As for Seth, to him was also born a son, and he called his name Enosh. And then men began to call on the name of the Lord. That's a funny statement. Well, you'll notice that the men is not there. That men seems to be in italics. If it is just men began to call on the name of the Lord, they'd always call on the name of the Lord. Why is it telling me now in chapter 6? Adam had a relationship with God. Adam called on the name of the Lord. So did the two boys, Cain and Abel. They were obviously in a relationship with God. They were asked to do sacrifices. They were all, I believe, that because we had the sons of God mating with the daughters of men, or people in a spiritual relationship with God, I think this was when the knowledge of God began to spread through the earth, and men at that time began to call on the name of the Lord. This is another thing I find exciting, and I really think I'm about the only one. But I'll try to make it exciting. Perhaps I should sing it. I don't know. Probably not a good idea. Oh, I've got to finish in a minute. I'm going to finish with this one, folks, so don't worry. We're not going to keep going. Nimrod. Nimrod only gets a few mentions in the Bible. Genesis 10, Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, he said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Chronicles says the same thing. Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. The only odd reference is in Micah, where it calls Assyria the land of Nimrod. And I think that's a totally different meaning. It means that there's a strong man in charge. There's a boss. Anyway, what's the story with Nimrod? We're going to have a quick look at the area that he governed. This is what the Bible says about him. Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Urech, Akkad, Calneh in the land of Shinar. And that's, let me move my tiles again, that's down in the bottom half here. That's what we called Sumer. And from that land, he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, Nineveh, and Calneh. That's in this area up there. And you can see those places. There's Calah there, and there's Nineveh there. So he starts off down here in Sumer and Akkad, and he goes up here and he establishes his kingdom here. Now we move to a historical character who's Sargon, the king of Akkad. He reigned from 2334 to 2227. From humble beginnings, he rose to great power, conquering Mesopotamia, parts of Iran and Turkey, etc. Not only did he found an empire, but he kept it operating smoothly with innovative use at the time of Akkadian bureaucrats installed in every conquered city. So what do we know about this guy, who was the king of Akkad, Sargon, almost you could say the first emperor? Well, here's his kingdom. His kingdom covers exactly the same cities as Nimrod, and it goes up to exactly the same. This is the bit that Sargon would have owned, not all this stuff up here. But here are the same places, Urech and Lassa, and all those places named in Genesis. And these are the ones also named when he extended his kingdom up here to the city of Nimrod. Almost sounds like Nimrod. Ashur, Nineveh. This known kingdom of Sargon is exactly the same kingdom that Nimrod owned. And I would certainly suggest that they are the same person. This is an academic paper. It goes for 305 pages. And can I confess, I did not read them all. I did read the first couple. This is an academic paper identifying Nimrod of Genesis 10 with Sargon of Akkad by the exegesis and the archaeological evidence. And it goes through that perhaps one of the most intriguing and enigmatic characters in the Old Testament is Nimrod, though his name only appears a few times. Opinions about his identity and character have abundant since ancient times. And he goes on to say that he is certain and presents 300 pages of proof why these two people are the same. And if you'd like to look it up, there's the reference. You can copy it down now if you like. Probably not. But if you want to write to me, I'll send it to you. That tells us that Akkad the first, of Sargon the first was in fact Nimrod. And why do I get excited about that? Because it makes the story of Genesis real. It makes it a part of history. It's all ancient history. And it's not fairy stories that are made up. Okay. Oh, look at that. I'm going to have to miss this one. And it's pretty. Okay, Robin, you can stop recording.